This was basically a creature that came from the 7th century and was inspired by Sunni fundamentalist zeal. His fiercest rival was on top of the West and Israel and others. His fiercest rivals was the Shia. We came to know in the last few years how deep the animosity between Sunni and Shia is. And of course, we don't have time to delve into too many details about that, but just take note that 1 million Muslims were slaughtered, mainly by other Muslims, in the last 5 years. 15 million refugees and displaced. And surprise, this was not the deed of Israel. This was the deed of Muslims versus Muslims. So it means that in the Middle East, there is something which goes beyond the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Then until then, everybody took it as kind of a master key by which to solve all the problems of the region. So first, for Israel is to understand that its conflict with the Palestinian is there. We do respect it, of course. But at the same time, we have to have it alongside with other conflicts that are sweeping the region. Second, ISIS was to become the pariah of everybody, especially when it started with the Hollywoodic scenes, which were sent by YouTubes and other to the whole world. And basically, it became kind of an enemy, public enemy number 1 of everybody. So here you could find kind of a gathering of the whole world, smashing ISIS and creating kind of a different map that I'll show you in a minute. This is the map of 2018, not 17. And you would see actually how geopolitics in the Middle East is something that you have to take with kind of a grain of salt or reservation. Now, let's say what happened here after the demise of ISIS. Since ISIS has seen the Shiites as his main rival or enemy, what happened here beneath the surface I mean Middle Eastern wisdom, not talking about kind of international conventions or something which goes beyond that. It is within Islam, Sunnah versus Shia. What happened here is the creation of a zero-sum game, which says, not loud and clear, but again, in kind of what was the subtext of the conflict, where ISIS loses, Iran wins. So if you are ready, let's move to the second map. Here you go. Look, the gray spot have always almost disappeared. We got kind of an Iranian engine which managed to acquire strongholds all over Iraq except Kurdish Iraq, and all over Syria except Kurdish Syria. Okay, we don't have too much time to delve into too many details once again, but remember, it's not only harsh penetration. What does that mean, harsh penetration? Creating kind of militias which are being compiled by locals, Shiites, and headed and supported by the Revolutionary Guards coming from Iran, in Persian Pasdaran, and this is something that we have to take into account. Okay? The same goes for Syria. Here is Lebanon. This is an old story. A quantum leap forward from Iran to Lebanon in 1928, 1882. That was the creation or the composition of Hezbollah. Hezbollah in Persian, Party of God. And this was to become a proxy of Iran in Lebanon. By the way, today there are elections in Lebanon. if you would like actually to get an idea about the Middle Eastern sting, here it is. You're going to have government in Lebanon. You're going to have an army in Lebanon. But again, behind the scene, one step further back from the front, you would see actually Hezbollah as the party in control to a large extent. And this is to say that Lebanon is kind of an Iranian fifth dome, one way or the other. Now, what they are doing now is to turn Syria and Iraq into another Lebanon. And they managed to do that because they are investing a lot in infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, telecom, electricity, education, indoctrination. A lot of money has been poured into those states as to create in the Middle East what we call, not necessarily Israel, but many, many Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia, which while looking up, what they see is kind of an Iranian ceiling. You see that? It is called in Arabic Al-Hilal al-Shi'i, which means the Shiite crescent. Shiite crescent, by which to say that this crescent is being stretched from the head of the Persian Gulf into the eastern flank of the Mediterranean. And of course, we have kind of a different geopolitical chessboard. What actually Iran took advantage of is, of course, one way or the other, Western naivete, dangerous naivete, that tells you in the Middle East, and since Israel is in the Middle East and not in Europe, we have to tell many Israelis, first of all, here is not Europe, which means that if you snooze, you lose. So you can't snooze. You can't snooze in the Middle East. Okay? Now remember that we have here another newcomer who did the Putin after the American pullout. This is Russia. Here in Latakia and Tartus. And let me tell you, actually, after having that picture, and of course there are many people who would argue some other things, but they have been argued that for decades, so I don't think that their argue is really right to the point. Iran is very dangerous. It has an agenda, and of course, what happened recently is just kind of a vivid indication of how dangerous Iran is. Okay, so now let me tell you actually what we have in mind. First of all, what we are trying to do in Tel Aviv University, and this is definitely very unique. This is the Moshe Dayan Center, whom I know that most of you are familiar with all its activities. We are trying actually to ask ourselves in 2018, what should come to the fore? What should be emphasized in order to make Israelis one way or the other better equipped with what I call Middle Eastern wisdom? We have to make them be stripped of Western conventions, first of all. And Israel is a Western country. That's the problem. It lives in the Middle East. And we have to make sure that we keep things in balance. The other thing is to be divided into tactically and strategically purposes. Let's say short run, medium run, long run. Short run. Short run, Israel is definitely has kind of a problem in this place. This is Golan Heights. I know that some of you have been there actually in the recent week or today. In any case, the Iranian, let us say, notion would be to create what we call actually an extension of South Lebanon. See that? And have this strip also in order to get kind of a border or an extension of the friction with Israel from both Lebanon and Syria. Israel cannot tolerate that. So basically what you can see and hear from everybody, and this is something that I think is a consensus, because you would hear that not only from Netanyahu and the chief of staff, but from other politicians and policymakers. You cannot allow Iran to create here a replica of South Lebanon. Now, since rebels here are becoming few and far between because they were slaughtered by chemical weaponry, and they are going to be moved to the new ghetto here in the north of Syria in Idlib, what Israel has to do is to create kind of a set of means and understandings by which to deter the Iranians from having a deep stronghold here in this line, which is being stretched in the reef of Damascus and down or southwards, okay? So for that, Israel is talking to the Russians. The Russians are the boss in the Middle East nowadays. You can do nothing in Syria unless you got kind of an advanced accommodation with Putin. It's not kind of a pleasant job, but we have to learn how to do that. We have been always talking to the Americans. That was nice and easy. Now you have to deal with real stuff when it comes to the Russians. And the surprising thing is that the Russians are so keen and so well tuned to their particular interest that if you are pretty smart, you can talk to them about some things by which the Russians would even like to send a message to Iran that enough is enough. In some certain cases, is something that even the Russians would opt for. So you have kind of different hands. Remember that the Turks are here. They already actually entered Syria. Why? They don't want to see a Kurdish entity here, because that would cut them off from the Middle East. And of course, Russia does talk to the Turks and make some actually agreements in advance. So basically, we are in a triangle which is very, very different from that we used to have in the 20th century. In the 20th century, it went without saying. Who is the boss? America. Who is the regional boss? Arabs. Now, no Arabs, no Americans. We have a new troika. Persians, Iranians, and Turks. This is the triangle which dictates the rhythm in the Middle East. Now, of course, what we have to do first is to deal with what we call the Iranian presence in Syria. And of course, Israel has no other choice but to let the Iranians, and since they are very smart and very selfish, they can understand actually the message if it is being delivered in Middle Eastern language. Okay? So what we are trying to make people understand is how to speak Persian, not only the language itself, but how to get closer to the mindset of the other, because we understand that trying to deal in the Middle East with Western conventions, it would be ineffective, and this is understatement. Second, well, just 1 minute for each, let us say, target. Strategically speaking, Israel has to do whatever it can to bring America back. Why? Because if this is the Shiite crescent, what we have to do is to have the Kurds, Sunnis, anti-Iranians, Jordan and Saudi Arabia create kind of an opposed crescent, which is supported by Arabs who do fear of Iran and supported by the United States. This is something for the medium term. For the long term, it is Israel. And since I know how much supportive you are of Israel, remember, we too talk about some main points that should be delivered to Israelis and Jews whenever it comes. First of all, we would like actually to provide Israel with what we call actually young Middle Eastern experts. Second, we have to have what we call, on top of that, kind of a new brief and fresh contact with the diaspora, Jews or Israelis and the diaspora. since we are here 6 million, and that's all. Other 2 million are Palestinians. And since in the diaspora we have 7 million, grosso modo, and 60% of these 7 million, again, grosso modo, of course, could be definitely actually be driven to something that is, let us say, relatively speaking, is far more extreme or let's say remote from Israel and Judaism. We have to make kind of, I would say, an 11th hour effort to make sure not that people would do aliyah, but that the link between Israel and the diaspora is going to be kind of a much more stronger than ever before, after having understood where do we stand. And of course, the last point, don't be desperate, cheer up. If you have a guy like Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the Saudi heir, which says loud and clear something that is unheard of in the Middle East. It is to say that, yes, Israel is the other state. But you know what? I'd rather work in tandem with Israel, economically speaking, security speaking, because my enemy is Iran. The same goes to Jordan. The same goes to Egypt. Same goes to Morocco. They just cut off relations with Iran. What happened? Iran supported Polisario in Western Sahara. This is an opposition group against the monarchical rule. So this is actually what we have to deal with one by one. We make them understand, first, that Israel is not biddable. Second, Israel is worth cooperating with, economically speaking, and in other items of life. So here I'll stop, and I'll hope, actually, let's hope for this. Well, the Chinese are kind of a third pillar on the new, let us say, geopolitical chessboard. One way or the other, while looking at the Chinese performance, you understand that the economy should be translated into geopolitical considerations. So we already speak Chinese too in Israel. And Tel Aviv University, I know I had the privilege to be with the president twice in China and promoting several things together. And I am proud to say that the Moshe Dayan Center has kind of a Middle Eastern institute where we have many, let us say, interactions with Chinese in Shanghai and Beijing. And I do think that China is more than welcome, because I think that this is high time for great powers to decide how to deal with this neighborhood, which has proved that if you don't have a guardian on the ground, you are doomed. So we would like actually to have kind of a new, let us say, power mechanism. Second, Iran. And Iran, I was asked actually 2 questions about Iran. First was the Iran deal. Second was the Iranian adventurism all over the place. Now think that way. In Iran, you have many voices, many colors. If you're going to actually listen to what Muhammad Javad Zarif, for example, has to say, he would come up with what they call in Europe charm offensive. Charm offensive, speak fluently in English and create something that makes European understand that everything is okay. But I'd rather listen to Soleimani. These are the guys who are the architects of the massacre in the Middle East. Now, what they have in mind, if I may, is that as long as they are so influential in the Middle East, they take captive not only the Middle East, but the Iranian public as well. Because what they are doing is trying to divert attention from many problems we have in Iran into the wider area and create kind of a different logic, not only for Iran, but for the Middle East. I would say something which might be sound paradox, and this is something that I just said last time I've been to the associations of Middle Eastern experts in the States. You know, for them, if Israel had not existed, it would have been necessary to invent such a state. And this is a bargaining chip for themselves to create kind of a raison d'être and deliver it to everybody in the Middle East and out of the region. That's the problem of Israel. It is kind of a creature that was created by the West. This is how it is being taken. And this is why I say, let's just make things in balance and keep our expectation as being the other state of the Middle East. There is cold peace with Egypt and others, and that's very, very good. True intimacy, true love, and true friendship. Well, listen, I would leave it for the Jezekiel, the prophet, or things like that. Now, the last thing is the deal. Well, I don't think that at this time it would be good if the deal is going to be totally violated by President Trump. The problem is that the Iranians are very nervous because nobody knows what Trump has in mind. Until recently, the Iranians knew everything about the West. They were informed in advance how the West is going to perform. If I would be a little bit cynical, I would say that Trump is doing exactly what the Iranians used to do to everybody. I don't know actually what decision I would take. We have another week until Saturday when Trump is going to tweet or whatever and to let us know, and the Iranians, what he decided. And, you know, paradoxically speaking, this language makes Middle Easterners be much more anxious and afraid about things. And I can tell you that, in my opinion, the most important thing is to just fix it up, which means that some of the clauses should be reopened. And after Macron is going to persuade everybody, Germany, Russia, Iran, that this should be opened or reopened, I guess that we can get something which is much more reasonable. And I hope that Iran will, one way or the other, work in tandem with the understandings. History tells us that this is a pie in the sky. But let's hope, because the Iranians do understand that there are some newcomers, especially Trump. And again, we can say many, many things about Donald Trump. I don't know actually if this is kind of a coherent strategy you have in mind. But remember, just last note, what the Iranians are looking at is the Korean Peninsula. And dear God, the short guy, as Trump actually depicted him, is embracing South Korea. And here he is going actually to meet with Trump. And Iran was of the opinion that North Korea is the model to be followed. So now we have a problem. Thank you.
Please sit down. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, you already did it, but for Professor Rabi,